I told Laura that she had to come home, and she argued with me, and I grabbed her by the arm. Laura was fighting me, and I punched her in the face, and she dropped to the ground. Krystal came towards me, and I took the knife from her, and I punched her in the face, and she went down. You know, it happened so fast.
Two little girls found brutally murdered in a quiet Midwestern town. A father's heartbreaking discovery, followed by a confession. Case closed until DNA evidence shattered everything. Welcome back to Dark Case Files, where we dig deep into some of the world's most gripping, solved, unsolved, and disturbing true crime stories. This is the story of Jerry Hobbs, a man who lost his daughter, his freedom, and nearly his life, all for a crime he didn't commit. But while he sat behind bars, the real killer was free, committing more unspeakable acts. What went wrong? How did investigators get it so terribly wrong? This case isn't just about one wrongful conviction. It's a chilling lesson about justice, power, and the consequences of tunnel vision. You're watching a story of tragedy, betrayal, and the long road to the truth. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to stay on top of the darkest mysteries from around the globe. It was the morning of May 8th, 2005, Mother's Day. The sun had only just started to rise in the quiet town of Zion, Illinois, when a man burst through the doors of the local police station. His face was pale, his chest heaving, and his voice shaking as he reported something almost too horrific to believe. His name was Jerry Hobbs, and he told the officers that he had just found the dead bodies of two young girls in a park, his own 8-year-old daughter, Laura, and her 9-year-old best friend, Krystal Tobias. The girls had gone missing the night before. Now, according to Hobbs, they lay lifeless in a wooded area of Beulah Park. They had been stabbed multiple times and left in the grass. Hobbs had stumbled upon the scene while searching for his daughter. Police quickly followed him back to the site, and what they found confirmed his story: two small bodies lying side by side, brutally attacked. It was a sight no parent should ever have to see, and yet it was Jerry Hobbs who led them straight to the scene. Within hours, a heartbreaking tragedy became a homicide investigation. But within just days, suspicion would shift. And it would land squarely on the man who claimed to have found the girls in the first place. The day before, May 7th, had started off like any other. Laura Hobbs and Krystal Tobias were best friends who lived near each other in a trailer park in Zion. Laura lived with her mother, Sheila Hollabaugh, and her siblings. Her father, Jerry Hobbs, had recently returned to Zion from Texas. He had been trying to reconnect with his family after being released from prison and was staying with them temporarily. Laura and Krystal spent much of that Saturday playing outside. As the sun began to set, they asked if they could go to Beulah Park, just a few blocks away, to play some more. Sheila gave Laura permission, and the girls set off. But when it started getting dark and the girls hadn't come back, Sheila began to worry. She stepped outside and called their names. When there was no response, she started asking neighbors if they'd seen them. No one had. As the minutes turned into hours, the fear deepened. Jerry joined the search. He was seen walking the streets, yelling for Laura, knocking on doors, and even searching the nearby woods. The community came together that night, worried but hopeful. But by midnight, hope was fading. Jerry Hobbs claimed that he didn't sleep that night. Instead, he said he continued searching into the early hours of Sunday morning. Just after sunrise, around 6 a.m., he entered Beulah Park again, following a trail into a lightly wooded area. And there, behind some bushes, he saw something that made him stop cold: the lifeless bodies of two little girls, side by side in the grass. Both girls had been stabbed multiple times. Laura had wounds on her neck, face, and around her eyes. Krystal had also been viciously attacked. It was immediately clear that whoever had done this had acted with rage. Jerry didn't call 911. Instead, He walked to the nearby police station and reported what he had seen. Police rushed to the scene and quickly confirmed everything he described. And yet, they couldn't help but notice something odd. How did Jerry know where to find the girls so precisely? The area was remote, thick with trees, and off the main path. The bodies weren't visible unless someone knew exactly where to look. That question, how did he find them so quickly, would spark the first seeds of doubt. At first, Jerry Hobbs was treated like a witness, a grieving father who had tragically found his daughter's body. But soon, investigators began to probe deeper. They noted that Jerry had led them directly to the bodies with no signs of hesitation. He never stumbled or searched. He just walked straight to the site. They also looked into Jerry's past. In Texas, he had a criminal record that included charges of assault and resisting arrest. He had once been accused of threatening a man with a chainsaw. Although he hadn't committed any crimes since returning to Zion, his violent history painted a picture of someone with a temper. Police asked Jerry to come in for further questioning. He agreed. Over the next several hours, he was interviewed again and again. The questions were repetitive. Detectives told him they knew he wasn't telling the full story. They said the evidence would point to him. They implied that confessing might make things easier. He denied it at first. But the hours wore on. Jerry wasn't given a lawyer. He was exhausted, emotionally wrecked, and vulnerable. After nearly 20 hours in custody, he began to change his story. On May 10th, Jerry Hobbs confessed to the murders of Laura and Krystal. According to his statement, he had gone looking for Laura on the night of May 7th and found her in the park with Krystal. He said that when Laura refused to come home, he got angry. The situation escalated, and in a sudden burst of rage, he attacked both girls. He claimed he had stabbed them with a small knife.
Sunday about 3 p.m., I got home with my wife Sheila and our 4 kids were flying kites at the lake. My daughter asked if she could go out and play with her friends. Sheila said it was okay even though she was still grounded. After stealing, she was $40. I didn't agree with letting her go, but I didn't say anything at the time. At about 4:30 p.m., I decided to check on Laura and bring her home. I walked by myself from my house to the park into the trail, where my son Jerry said Laura hangs out. I was walking on a dirt trail and I ran into Laura and her friends Krystal on the trail. I told Laura that she had to come home and she argued with me and I grabbed her by the arm. She tried pulling away and was telling me to let her go. Krystal also telling me to let Laura go. Krystal pulled out a small knife from her pocket and again told me to let Laura go. Laura was fighting me and I punched her in the face and she dropped to the ground. Krystal came towards me and I took the knife from her and I punched her in the face and she went down. And then went in a rage and stabbed Krystal in the chest and neck. She stopped moving and I went over to Laura. She was moving around and fighting. I punched her in the face again and stabbed her.
Police now had a confession. They concluded final statement with some questions.
Is this your statement, Jerry?
Yeah,
Was this given free voluntarily?
yeah.
Okay.
The story made national headlines. A convicted felon, fresh out of prison, had allegedly murdered his own daughter and her friend on Mother's Day weekend. The public was horrified. Jerry was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was denied bail and sent to jail to await trial. But even with a confession, the case was far from airtight. Despite the apparent breakthrough, something didn't sit right with Jerry's public defender. The confession, given after nearly 20 hours of relentless interrogation, lacked critical details. When asked specific questions, like what knife he had used or where it was, Jerry stumbled. He couldn't provide consistent answers. In fact, the police never found a murder weapon. What's more, the confession contained inconsistencies with the medical examiner's findings. Jerry said he stabbed the girls in a fit of rage, but the autopsy suggested a more calculated attack. The number of wounds, the precision, the placement, it all suggested something darker, possibly even premeditated. Still, prosecutors moved forward. To them, the confession was enough. They planned for trial. But in the background, the defense started asking tougher questions. Why were there no witnesses? Why wasn't there any blood on Jerry's clothes? And most importantly, what about DNA? The girls' bodies had been found in the grass, in a state of undress. That raised a disturbing possibility: sexual assault. The police had taken samples during the autopsy and submitted them for forensic testing. When the results came back, it sent shockwaves through the case. The DNA found on Laura's body didn't match Jerry Hobbs. This should have been a major red flag. If Jerry had stabbed his daughter and her friend in a brutal rage, his DNA should have been present on the bodies, the clothing, or at the scene. But the forensic evidence didn't support that. Instead, an unknown male profile had been recovered. But investigators dismissed it. They argued that the DNA might have come from prior contact, perhaps another child they had played with, or even a secondary transfer from shared items. To them, it wasn't enough to override Jerry's confession. So, he remained behind bars. Months turned into years. Jerry sat in jail, awaiting trial, while his attorneys continued to fight for more testing. They insisted that if the DNA didn't match, someone else must have been responsible. But the prosecution clung to their theory. After all, Jerry had confessed. Why would an innocent man do that? In 2010, 5 years after the murders, a new development cracked the case wide open. The FBI, working on an unrelated investigation, entered DNA from a rape case into the National CODIS database. The case involved a woman in Virginia who had been assaulted in her home by a masked intruder. The DNA profile from that case matched the unknown male DNA from the Zion murders. The man behind that DNA was Jorge Torrez. He was a former Marine, stationed in Virginia. But before that, he had lived in Zion, Illinois, the very town where Laura and Krystal were killed. In fact, he had lived just a few blocks from Beulah Park. This revelation changed everything. The DNA match in the Laura and Krystal case was chilling, but it wasn't the first time Jorge Torrez had appeared on law enforcement's radar. By the time his DNA was linked to the Zion murders, he was already behind bars for another brutal crime, a horrifying attack that had unfolded hundreds of miles away in Arlington, Virginia. In early 2009, a woman walking home from the metro station was approached by a man who offered her a ride. She declined, but the man wouldn't take no for an answer. He attacked her, forced her into his car, and drove her to a secluded location. There, he repeatedly assaulted her and strangled her until she lost consciousness. Miraculously, she survived, and once she regained her strength, she reported every detail to the police. She described her attacker as confident, controlled, like someone who had done this before. Despite a lack of physical evidence at first, a DNA swab was eventually taken from Jorge Torrez during the investigation. It was that sample that finally linked him to the 2005 murders of the 2 girls in Zion. When the match came through, both Illinois and Virginia authorities were stunned. They realized the man they were investigating for rape and attempted murder in Virginia had already killed before, and worse, had let someone else take the fall for it. Detectives traveled from Zion to Arlington to confront Jorge. When they sat across from him in the interrogation room, he was cold and guarded. He denied everything, even in the face of the overwhelming DNA evidence. But investigators were no longer asking. They were telling him what they knew. Eventually, in a calculated move, authorities placed an informant in Jorge's jail cell. It was a high-stakes risk, but it paid off. The informant managed to record hours of conversations, during which Jorge made chilling admissions, not just about Laura and Krystal, but about other crimes as well. In those recordings, he spoke with disturbing detachment. He described the girl's final moments as if recalling a mundane event. There was no emotion, no regret, only cold facts. This secret confession was the final nail in the coffin. When federal authorities heard those tapes, they realized they were dealing with something even darker than they'd initially believed. Jorge wasn't just a murderer, he was a serial predator, a man capable of extraordinary violence who had moved through life virtually undetected. And it was no coincidence. He had served in the U.S. Marine Corps. He passed background checks. He was the kind of man who knew how to present himself as harmless, disciplined, well-spoken, clean-cut. That mask had protected him for years. After his confession and DNA confirmation, prosecutors in Illinois moved swiftly. In 2014, Jorge Torrez was indicted for the murders of Laura Hobbs and Krystal Tobias. The state of Illinois sought the death penalty. But before he could be tried in Illinois, he faced justice in Virginia for the 2009 rape and attempted murder. In 2014, he was convicted in federal court and sentenced to death. It was the first time in decades that a federal death sentence had been handed down in Virginia. Meanwhile, back in Lake County, Illinois, prosecutors weighed whether to proceed with a second death penalty case. In the end, they chose not to, knowing he would already spend the rest of his life on death row. But they didn't forget the impact his actions had caused, especially on Jerry Hobbs. Jerry had spent 5 years in prison, accused of the unimaginable, of brutally murdering his own daughter and her best friend. Even after his release, the community hadn't welcomed him back. His name had been permanently stained by suspicion. When Jorge's arrest and DNA match were made public, Jerry's vindication was finally complete. But it didn't undo the trauma he had endured. Years of wrongful imprisonment, time lost with his family, and the pain of knowing that the real killer had gone free, it left scars no court ruling could erase. In 2010, Jerry filed a lawsuit against the police department and Lake County officials, alleging misconduct and coercion. The civil suit revealed disturbing details about how his confession had been obtained. Investigators had grilled him for nearly 20 hours over 2 days. He was emotionally devastated, drug-addicted, and grieving. Experts testified that his confession bore all the hallmarks of a coerced statement, given not out of guilt, but out of confusion and exhaustion. Eventually, the county settled the lawsuit. Jerry Hobbs received a $7.75 million payout for the time he had wrongfully spent behind bars. But no amount of money could restore what he had lost. As for Jorge Torrez, his name would become forever tied to a string of horrific crimes. In addition to the Zion murders and the Virginia attack, investigators began reviewing other cold cases from areas where he had lived or been stationed. They feared he may have had more victims, and that the full scope of his violence might never truly be known. Even now, Jorge remains on federal death row. He has appealed his conviction and sentence, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. The DNA, the jailhouse confessions, the survivor's testimony, and 2 little girls whose lives were cut short for reasons that still defy comprehension. In the end, justice was served, but at an unbearable cost. The tragedy in Zion wasn't just about a crime. It was about a system that failed. It failed 2 little girls, it failed their families, and it failed Jerry Hobbs. It mistook grief for guilt. It chose a suspect instead of seeking the truth. And for 5 long years, it let a killer walk free, while an innocent father sat behind bars, waiting for someone to listen. And as always, here on Dark Case Files, we don't just tell the stories, we dig deeper. Into the cracks of broken justice systems, into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable, and into the haunting aftermath left behind. Today's case is a harsh reminder that truth can be buried for years, and sometimes, justice arrives too late. If you found this case as gripping and devastating as we did, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to Dark Case Files, where we investigate the world's most chilling solved, unsolved, and twisted cases. New deep dives are released regularly, and trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, not every case is as closed as it seems.